Today's video we're going to look at an early 8-bit VGA card from Cirrus Logic, generally known as the Eagle 2 card or the Eagle 2 chipset.
We review old technology from games to old PCs and don't forget the toys. Don't get ancient electronics. We cover it all.
So I originally intended to talk about this card when I did my video on my Epson Equity 1E. But as I did that video and I did benchmarks, I kind of started thinking that this card kind of deserves its own video, its own kind of looking at. I also thought this would be a decent card to do a video for GPU June. But GPU June really focuses on 3D accelerator cards, so this card really wouldn't count. But I'm still going to release this video during June, so if you're tired of videos about, Voodoo 2s and 3s and TNT 2s and Radeons and GeForces and whatnot, sit back, relax, maybe get a snack, and let's take a brief look at this early VGA card from Cirrus Logic. I don't think it's their first card, but it's very early on. It may be their second card that they did. Generally, this is known as the Eagle 2 chipset or the Eagle 2 card. We have two chips here and here. We have a CL-GD520A, and this one is a CL-GD510A. Right here, we have a couple different oscillators here. We've got some memory right here, and there are several versions of this card, different layouts and whatnot, but this one specifically is the VG1000 Rev 2, and as you can see right here, this is an 8-bit VGA card. Now, as far as VGA cards go, this one is pretty early. I believe VGA came out in '87. This card did not come out long after. This actually might be an '87 or maybe an '88 or '89 card, but I think it's either '87 or '88. So very early card. It is pretty slow in VGA, as we'll see. It being an early VGA card, purely 8-bit, it is pretty slow. But this card's kind of claim to fame is its compatibility with CGA, just kind of out of the box. So one of the issues with VGA cards is they do kind of emulate older standards. So if you have a VGA card in your machine, it can do CGA and it can do EGA. Unfortunately, a lot of these cards have trouble with certain games that use CGA, that use certain kind of tricks, that use maybe certain kind of tricks or that aren't quite standard. Sometimes you want to look for a VGA card that says it's CGA register compatible, but I found even then some of the trickier CGA games have issues with VGA cards. Most VGA cards. Now, supposedly this card is more compatible right out of the box. Because I've had VGA cards that say specifically they are CGA register compatible, and certain games like Starquake or Digger still have issues. But supposedly this card here does not, and you don't have to use any kind of special TSR or anything. You just kind of install it, and it should hopefully work with some of these games that give other VGA cards trouble. We'll bench this card against a couple other cards, roughly, from the era, and we'll see how it does compatibility-wise. Another thing you'll notice, that being an early VGA card, it kind of has the earlier style connector up here, feature connector. Certain cards, like say the like MPEG decoders and stuff, like the Real Magic, you could connect them via here. And then if we look here, this is pretty common with really early VGA cards. It'll have the standard VGA connector we're all kind of used to, but it also has the older type. So you can connect this to an older TTL monitor, like an EGA or a CGA monitor. This was very common at the time since, both types of monitors were still very much in use. A lot of people, still had EGA and CGA monitors. With this card, they could hook it up to their brand spanking new VGA monitor, or it's still compatible and you could still use it with an older style monitor. Now right here it does have switches, and you do have to set this manually for what kind of monitor you're hooking it up to. So right now it is set for a VGA monitor. I believe these first 4 switches determine the type of monitor. And then this one determines if this is a primary or secondary card. And then the last three, I think those also have to do with monitor type. So now that we've taken a quick look at this card, let's install it in the machine and take a look at some results. The second card I'm thinking about taking a look at is another old timer. This is another giant monster of a card, and this is from Sang Labs. This is the ET3000. So this was the card that he had before the venerable and much beloved ET4000, which is known as one of the fastest ISA video cards out there. I believe this card's a little newer. Well, 1989 right here. I believe this card's a little bit newer than the Cirrus Logic card. I think I'm pretty sure it has more memory. But yeah, I have actually heard that this card is pretty slow too. It is not a fast VGA card. It's probably faster than that Eagle 2 card though. Same sort of situation here. Oops, if I can get it working. So we've got regular VGA connector and then one for connecting like TTL monitors like VGA, CGA. And then we even have a little bonus bus mouse connector right there. Not sure what went or goes right there in that little socket. Looks like we do have a switch box right here. But it might auto switch. I'm not sure. It might know which monitor you hook it up to, or might have to play with switches. Probably have to play with switches. I mean, if there's a switch block there. But I don't know. I do know I've had this hooked up to a couple machines before, but I've never really benched it against anything. But I thought it was an interesting card to try. This is the ATI Mach 8. So this is the card that came before the pretty well-known Mach 32 and 64 cards. This is 16-bit ISA. As the others, this has no problem working in an 8-bit ISA slot. Chip here says 91. I think this came out about the same time as the ATI VGA Wonder XL24 card. So this one doesn't have all the little goodies on it. It doesn't have the bus mouse port. It only has kind of a standard VGA connector. It doesn't have the ability to connect to an older style you know, CGA, EGA type monitor or digital monitor. I believe it does auto detect if it's in an 8 or 16-bit slot, but this jumper also has something to do with it. But yeah, this is more or less the equivalent of the ATI VGA Wonder. I think this one might be very slightly newer. But I don't know for sure. But it is an interesting card that you don't see too often. And the next card I know we have seen many times on this channel. And this is my ATI card here, the VGA Wonder XL24. Now it's interesting because this card comes up on my channel a lot. Very flexible, pretty fast card. I really like this card. This is a very capable card, yet for some reason it just can't seem to find a permanent home in any of my machines. But it's a 16-bit card, but it will work in a 8-bit slot. It will auto detect you know, what kind of monitor and what kind of slot it's in. So there's no jumpers or switches on this card at all. I believe it has a full 1 megabyte of RAM. It's not the fastest ISA VGA card out there, but it is fairly speedy. I believe it's from like 92-ish, so it's probably the newest of the cards we're going to look at. It also has the bus mouse connector, and it also has the connector for a VGA monitor and like TTL, CGA, EGA type monitors. This is a pretty capable card. And then the final card we're going to look at here, it's kind of a boring card, but fairly ubiquitous. The Trident 8900 series. This specifically is one of the D revision cards. So this is also a 16-bit ISA card, but it will work just fine in an 8-bit slot. I think we have to set a jumper though to set it to 8-bit ISA mode. These cards are very run-of-the-mill. You would find them a lot in old usually like 386 and even some 286 and 486 systems. But they're very ubiquitous, very common. But they're all kind of okay, slow to okay performance. But the D revision does something different with memory, and it's actually quite fast. I have benched this card before, and it's up there as one of the faster ISA cards. So I kind of want to use this to see how it, because I know this card's pretty fast, so I kind of want to see how this fares against the other cards. I'm not sure if it's 1 megabyte or 512K. I'm not sure how much memory on this guy. And then, unlike the other cards, all we have is a VGA. So yeah, so we're going to test these cards, and we're going to see how they do. All right, let's take a look at our first series of benchmarks here. Just a reminder, these are all done in 8-bit. So all these tests were done on my Epson Equity 1E. That machine's running an NEC V30 at 10 megahertz. That machine only has 8-bit slots in it, so all of these cards are definitely running in 8-bit mode. Whenever I do benchmarks a lot, like, I don't do a ton of benchmarks. If you want to get really scientific results, you've got to do a lot of benchmarking. So when we, on this channel, just because of time constraints, and this is actually true for probably almost all, you have these YouTube vintage computer channels, they do benchmarks. I don't know, in my opinion, it's kind of more of a guide. I don't generally take it as definitive, because there's just a lot of factors at play, and just sometimes there's just a limit of how many benchmarks you can run, and time. You can't run 100 different games and whatnot. So anyways, with that out of the way, let's take a look at our results here. So first we have this machine. I don't know if you've watched, I've done videos on it in the past. This is an CGA machine. So other than IBM, the Epson Equity 1E is the only computer that has CGA, which is kind of a cut down version of VGA. I won't go into it too much, but I have that here benched against the other cards. So unfortunately, with a machine this old, it's kind of hard to find benchmarks for really old machines. But I have a couple of the more popular ones here that do take video into account. So first one, we have Check It. This is 2.1, and I don't know how they measure video, but all these, like I said, all these benchmarks here do measure video. So the CGA is by far the fastest here with Check It 2.0. The Mach 8, the Trident 90 or 8900D, sorry, and the ATI Wonder XL24, all pretty consistent there. The ET3000AX is the lowest. And then actually the Eagle 2 chipset, at least by Check It, it is actually the second fastest, just below CGA. Looking at Landmark 2.0 and Landmark 6.0, all across the board with the first couple cards I tested, they're pretty much all even between CGA, the two ATI cards, and the 8900. I think they're hitting a CPU bottleneck here, because these are all, well, again, I don't know about the CGA, but these are all kind of the faster and newer video cards here. So it seems like, my guess is they're hitting some kind of bottleneck when running Landmark 2.0 and 6.0, because they're pretty much all the same. And then, again, the ET3000 card, it's the slowest in the two Landmark tests. And then the Eagle 2, it's a little bit faster than the ET3000, but it's a little bit slower than all of the faster cards. So yeah, like I said, I couldn't do a lot of benchmarks with this older machine in 8-bit mode. So what I also want to do, I wanted to put these cards in a much faster machine, try to get rid of any kind of CPU bottleneck, and see how they do in kind of a much faster machine. So that's what we're going to look at next. Alright, so now let's try doing a couple tests in a much faster system. So this system is using 16-bit ISA slots, and it's running AMD 5X86 at 133 megahertz, so quite a bit faster than our 10 megahertz Epson Equity here. So quick note, these are in 16-bit ISA slots. Some of these cards auto-detect. The ATI cards, the Mach 8 and the ATI Wonder, there's no switches on them. They just kind of auto-detect what slot you put them in. I don't know if there's software that lets you pick or something, but they were in 16-bit ISA slots, so they auto-detected that, and I believe they just went into 16-bit mode. The Trident card, I actually have two measurements here. I have one for 8-bit and 16-bit mode because you can set the jumpers on that to select the mode. The ET3000, I don't know. It has switches on it, but I didn't come up with anything. I couldn't find anything, so it's in the exact same configuration that it was in the Epson computer. So I believe it's still running in 8-bit mode, and of course the Eagle 2 is just an 8-bit VGA card, so obviously it's an 8-bit mode. I've also thrown in a Matrux Millennium card, just because it's actually a PCI card. I just threw that into the test because that's the card that I originally had installed in this machine. It's an older 46 motherboard with PCI slots, but I threw that in there as just kind of a comparison note. So obviously the Matrux Millennium is much faster than the others. So just ran 3 benchmarks here for my own sanity because some of these cards Doom ran incredibly slow, and just doing that benchmark over and over and over and over, it's just, I don't have the time. So I've kind of kept it down to 3 benchmarks. We have 3D Bench 1.0C, we have PC Player benchmark at 320 by 200, and then we have Doom, and I did run it at max detail. But yeah, let's go through these real quick. The 3 fastest cards, the 2 ATI cards, and then the 8900D in 16-bit mode, they're obviously the front runners here. Not as quick as the Matrux, obviously, but they were the front runners here. They were all pretty consistent with each other. The Trident card just inched out a little bit more performance. That makes sense because the D revision of the Trident 8900 is pretty fast. So I'm not surprised that was the fastest of all the ISA cards here. So let's just look at the ones we know are running in 8-bit mode. It looks like the fastest of the 3, which is the ET3000AX based card, the Cirrus Logic Eagle 2, and then the 8900D in 8-bit mode. It looks like the fastest there is the ET3000, which, okay, back when we were running in our Epson Equity computer in an 8-bit slot at 10 megahertz, it was actually the slowest. But here it's the fastest, so I don't know. It's not the fastest by a lot. It's only a few frames in most of these, 1 or 3 or 4. But it is generally faster than the other 2, except for Doom, which it is very slightly slower. So, I mean, let's look at the Trident. Yeah, I don't know. It's a little slower than the ET3000, but they're very close. And then in all of these tests, the Eagle 2, which is kind of the results I was originally expecting, is definitely the slowest here, noticeably slower. Except in Doom, where where it's 1 frame faster than the ET3000 and like 1 frame slower than the Trident card. It's within margin of error, obviously, but yeah, it is like slightly by a small margin the slowest of all these cards. All right, so let's. I mean, I don't know if we got great results here with these benchmarks. I mean, benchmarks are always kind of fun to look at, but like I said earlier, just take them with a grain of salt. So I think the next thing I want to do, I just want to look at compatibility, because that's the big thing with this Eagle 2 card. That's its kind of claim to fame is, well, it's a VGA card that's just really compatible with CGA games. So let's take a look and see if there's any truth to that. Before we look at compatibility real quick, let's just take a look at the font on this, because as I was doing research on this card, I seen a couple references to the font that this card does, and people even had made programs to like emulate it. But so look here, this is the font of the Cirrus Logic Eagle 2, and then let's look at the font that the other cards give. And then here's the usual font. I think this is with the Matrux installed. And then let's take a look at them, the fonts side by side. So for our compatibility test, let's start with Digger. Digger is a CGA game, and when you play it on most VGA cards, this is what you get. It's kind of an unplayable mess. This is the image I got with all of the cards other than the Eagle 2. So both of the ATI cards, the Trident card, as well as the older card based on the Sang Labs ET3000. This is the same sort of mess that I got with all of those cards. So let's install the Cirrus Logic Eagle 2 and let's see if we get a different result. And indeed we do. All I did is install the Eagle 2 based card. I didn't use any kind of special drivers or anything. All I did is install it, and we actually get a playable game here. Now, if you're familiar with this game, you may be saying, yes, but the colors are off. What should be brown is yellow. Well, I thought that was kind of an incompatibility issue as well. And then I did a little bit more research, and apparently, from what I can find, it actually isn't a hardware issue. It's actually a software issue. Apparently, most of the copies of Digger that are out there on the internet are kind of like bad hacks. And this is actually the color mode for the bonus round. And I did get my copy from the internet. So apparently, I just got a bad copy of the game, so it seems to be a software issue. I assume if you had like an original copy of Digger and you played it with this card, I would assume you would get the correct colors. So not the fault of the card, apparently. So yeah, so far a great showing. Again, every other card I've ever run, every other VGA card that is, has always given me that garbled mess. Put in the card with the Cirrus Logic chipset here, and it's completely playable. So yeah, that's a big plus. So let's move on to the other game that I like to use for testing CGA compatibility, and that's Starquake. Now that game does things a little bit different. As you play the game, it's changing the CGA palette, and a lot of VGA cards cannot change the palette. It just sticks with the default one with it's like the magenta colors. It doesn't change palette, it sticks with that. So let's see if the Cirrus Logic card will actually be able to change the palettes correctly. So here's Starquake here, and yeah, we can tell pretty much right away. This is the result you get usually when you run this game, the CGA game, with a VGA card. And this is the result, again, that I got with every other card except the Eagle 2. So running all of the other cards, this is the result I get. And this is usually what you'd expect. It just does not change palette. It sticks with that default, like the magenta and that blue, that kind of color, the standard CGA color palette that most VGA cards just default to and stick with. And that's what we get here. It just doesn't change, sticks with that one. So let's put in the Cirrus Logic card, and then let's see if the game works correctly with that card. And here we are with the Cirrus Logic Eagle 2 installed, and you can tell right away it's a different color palette. We can see it switching. It's switching color palettes as well as intensities as we go through the different stages, different areas. So you can see here it is switching correctly to different palettes. Again, none of the other VGA cards I've tested have been able to pull this off. The Cirrus Logic Eagle 2 is the only VGA card I've ever used that has been able to get both of these games correct. Now, I have tested CGA before. Again, that never came in a discrete card. That's been able to pull off both of these games correctly. But so far as my experience in testing, the Cirrus Logic card is the only one that's been able to pull this off. Again, I haven't used any kind of like program or drivers or TSR, anything to tell it to go into CGA mode or anything. This is just straight installing it, and it works pretty much right off the bat. So the last thing I want to try with this card, I do want to try hooking it up to a TTL monitor, the other output, and I just want to see how it does with an actual like CGA/EGA style TTL monitor. Unfortunately, I couldn't really test the card through its 9-pin output on the back. in TTL mode. I just couldn't seem to get it to work correctly. Now this is it displaying on my Mitsubishi multi-sync monitor. This is a monitor from 1986 that can handle all sorts of signals, and it's probably deserving of its own short kind of AV overview video, which I may do in the future, but here it is on this monitor. Now I've confirmed the cable works correctly and the monitor works correctly, but despite all my fiddling with switches in the back, this is the best I could do, which is sort of a weird monochrome mode, and it's blue for some reason. Now I tried the switch settings in the back all kind of ways, secondary as a secondary and as a primary card. I tried in TTL mode, EGA, CGA, but this is the best I could get it. For some reason it's in this weird monochrome mode, and I can try to run a game here. Let's try to run Alley Cat, and it'll start to load up and I'll get a error that it needs a color monitor. Yeah, this program requires a color graphics adapter. So I'm not sure what's going on there. I don't know why it's just like defaulting to as like a weird MDA or monochrome type card. I don't know, maybe it's some kind of conflict with the Epson Equity it's currently installed in, but yeah, I could not get it to correctly output CGA or EGA through the 9-pin video out, unfortunately. And that was a quick look at this pretty uncommon early VGA card. It was pretty slow, as we kind of figured at the beginning of this video, being a very early VGA card, but I was pleasantly surprised at its compatibility with CGA. I just installed this in the machine. I didn't have to use any special settings. It was connected to a VGA monitor. You know, I didn't have to use like special drivers to increase compatibility. But those two games I tried, you know, Digger and Starquake, none of the other cards could actually run them correctly, but this one did kind of live up to its name as being a very backwards compatible CGA card, so I was impressed there. These cards are pretty hard to come by. I've seen a couple machines where this was actually the built-in chipset. I had an old BSR 386 machine, but I think the one in there was a little cut down. It only had, you know, the VGA output. It didn't have switches or anything, so that one was a bit more limited. It is a very interesting card. Bit of a bummer I couldn't get the TTL out working, so the CGA or EGA mode, I couldn't get it working when hooked up to a TTL monitor. I'm not sure what the issue is. It just might be some kind of setting of some sort, maybe something I'm missing. But overall, it's a very interesting card. I believe this is definitely the card I'm going to install in my Epson Equity 1E. Since the CPU is a bit of a bottleneck there anyways, it shouldn't really matter that this is a slower VGA card. I'm not going to be using that machine with anything intense VGA games since it's got an NEC V30 in it. But the backwards compatible with CGA is really nice, being in that, you know, an 8086/NEC V30 XT type machine. So yeah, very interesting card. If you have any comments or anything you'd like to say about it, or a personal experience, just let us know in the comments section, and I'll see you in the next video.